Hello and welcome to the Fit to Transform podcast, where you learn how to train and diet effectively and, most importantly, how to maintain those results for life, once and for all. I'm Nikias Tomasiello, a transgender training and nutrition coach working online with anyone who's ready for a true lifestyle transformation, anywhere they may be in the world. As a friendly reminder, any and all information provided is for educational purposes only. You should consult with your doctor before implementing any changes to your diet and exercise program. With that disclaimer out of the way, thank you for being here. Now grab yourself a cup of tea or pre-workouts and enjoy. Yo, welcome back to the podcast. In this solo episode, I'm going to answer several questions that I've been receiving. This is my second official Q&A episode. I have a question on fat loss, one on muscle building phases, a third question on working out when you're short on time, and a final question on my experience using tape to bind my chest at the gym. So let's get straight into the first one. The question is, I spent a week away and couldn't track calories as accurately as usual. I did my best to make the right choices, but I can't be sure. Have I undone my fat loss progress? So I'm going to start from the end, which is, have I undone my fat loss progress? First, I want to give you an objective perspective on fat loss. In order to gain a pound of body fat, you need to consume 3,500 calories above the amount of calories you need to maintain your weight. So if in one day you would normally maintain your weight on 2,000 calories, but instead you eat 5,500, then overnight you are likely going to gain a pound of body fat. In other words, unless you've been eating 3,500 calories above your maintenance every single day during this week away, there is no chance that you've gained a pound a day. Now, you could also spread the same 3,500 calories over the course of 2 days or a week, and then you would gain a pound of body fat over 2 days or a week. So it is possible that you have eaten a little bit above your maintenance calories and you might have gained a pound or two over this week away. Now, my advice here is, first and foremost, you need to ascertain whether this happened. And it's not as simple as stepping on the scale as soon as you get home. In fact, I would suggest that you wait at least a few days before you check your body weight. Because when you're traveling, your body is going to undergo some physiological stress due to the change of environment, even if you don't necessarily realize it. So normally when a client goes away for a whole week, I would recommend that they do not check their weight for at least 2 to 3 days. So if you're back home on Monday, I would not check your body weight on the scale until Wednesday at the earliest. If you do, you might find that your weight went up, but that could simply be due to water retention from this extra physiological stress from traveling. In addition, you can't only look at your body weight even 2 to 3 days after coming back home and establish whether you have indeed gained weight or not. You need to take the average body weight after at least 3 to 7 days, because as I mentioned in episode number 3, within my No Quit Kit guide to fat loss, it's the average body weight across a long period of time, across at least a week, that gives you data on whether you've been gaining, losing, or maintaining your weight. It's not a single data point taken on one day. I also recorded an entire episode on how to use the scale as a tool for fat loss and muscle gain. That's the title of the episode. So if you're unsure on how to take and interpret scale weight data, I strongly recommend you go back and listen to episode number 30, and there will be a link to this in the show notes. Having said that, let's say that you did regain a couple of pounds over this week away. Now, what's the worst that can happen? You've mentioned that you have made fat loss progress in your question. So clearly, you know how to be successful with a fat loss phase. You have the tools to lose body fat whenever you choose to. So the worst that can happen is that if you aim to continue losing body fat once you're back home from your holiday, then you may need to add a week or two to your fat loss phase in order to lose the weight that you've regained. It's common to panic about potentially having lost progress and backtracked a bit, but ultimately, if you have been gaining knowledge throughout this process, which is what I highly encourage you to do, and that's why it's so important to me to give all of my clients as much knowledge as they would like to get about fat loss and muscle gain, then you have the tools to lose body fat or gain muscle anytime that you choose to and that you want to. Since the question says fat loss progress, I'm assuming that after this week away, you're going to go back into a fat loss phase. But let's also explore what might happen if you've gained a little bit of weight and you weren't intending on going into a fat loss phase or going back into a fat loss phase upon your return. It sounds like you have been thinking about your nutrition. You didn't take this week as a free-for-all week where you completely forgot about all of the healthful habits that you've been working on. So under those circumstances, I would be really surprised if you had gained a lot more than a couple of pounds. And if that's the amount of weight that you gained, that may still be within your maintenance body weight range. Because when you're aiming for maintenance, you're not trying to aim for one specific number. And if you go a little bit above, you're now in a caloric surplus and gaining weight, or if you go a little bit below, you're now in a deficit and losing weight. For most people, it's a range, and it's a range of several pounds. My rule of thumb, when I'm assessing whether somebody is maintaining their weight within a range or going above or below that range, is to gauge whether they've overshot or undershot their body weights that they were maintaining by 2 to 3%. For example, if on average you had been maintaining around 150 pounds, 2 to 3% would be 3 to 5 pounds. So if you're gaining 3 to 5 pounds above 150 or 3 to 5 pounds below 150 over the course of multiple weeks, and the trend keeps going either up or down, then I would think that you are actually in a caloric surplus or deficit, and therefore if your goal is not to gain or to lose, we need to change your caloric intake and caloric expenditure. But if you go away for a week, you come back, you're a couple of pounds heavier, then you go back to your normal habits. For one, I think that there's a potential that you see a little bit of fat loss and your body will go back to the previous weight that you were maintaining just by virtue of returning to your standard habits of maintenance at home. Or even if it didn't, if it's only a couple of pounds, as I said, it may well still be within your maintenance range and you don't really need to do anything about it until you see that the trend keeps going up over several weeks, not just a single week that you spent away. In my opinion, the best that you can do in your situation is commit to returning to your usual targets and daily habits as soon as you get home, and commit to learning from the experience. So ask yourself, what did I do really well while I was away? And what didn't work so well? And once you've reflected on what didn't work so well, you can take it a step further and think, how can I improve upon these aspects that didn't work so well next time. And I covered this in another episode, which was only 7 minutes long, and it was episode 26, titled What If You Messed Up? What's really important is that you needed this experience away from home to understand what would and wouldn't work under these new circumstances. Now, if you do reflect on what you did well and what you can improve, you'll arm yourself with extra experience and knowledge that you can then apply to the next time you have a similar experience. And you'll be able to improve a little bit compared to what happened this week. And every time, your aim is to be a little bit better and to deal with each experience a little bit more smoothly. That's why the journey is so fundamental. It's not about being perfect from the get-go, which is impossible and unrealistic. It's about collecting experiences and learning from the obstacles that you encounter. So I hope that this was helpful to you. Question number 2. Any suggestions when feeling uncomfortably large in a muscle building phase? So I have a whole episode that I recorded, and this was episode 14, where I talked about the mindset that you'd be best served by during a muscle building phase. The episode is titled Making the Most of a Massing Phase: Myths, Realistic Expectations, and Mindset Tips. And it sounds like this question asker would really benefit from the mindset tips in particular. So again, this is episode 14. What I want to tell you here right now is to consider 2 questions. The first question is, how much does it matter in the grand scheme of things that you're feeling uncomfortably large right now? In a muscle building phase, it's inevitable to add a little bit of extra body fat as you're also gaining muscle. The way I like to look at it is that it's a short-term discomfort for the sake of your long-term goal, which is to build more muscle at the moment if you are in a muscle building phase. Now, importantly, if throughout this muscle building phase you have been approaching a level of body fat that would put you at risk for unwanted health complications, then that's different. In that case, I would likely end the surplus and I would consider maintaining and then potentially going into a fat loss phase just to make sure that you stay as healthy as you can. But if that's not the case, from a mindset perspective, are you willing to take this short-term discomfort for the sake of your long-term goal, or are you not? Only you can answer this question. And if you've been in a muscle building phase in a surplus for several months, at least 3 to 4, and at the beginning, this feeling of discomfort was lower and it was more worth it to you, but now you have been in a surplus for a long enough time that it's no longer worth it to you, then perhaps your answer will be, no, it's not worth it to feel this way, in which case my suggestion would be, then it would make sense to end the surplus, return to maintenance maybe for a week or 2, or you could go straight into a fat loss phase if that fits within your timeline and your goals. On the other hand, if you truly consider, am I giving in to this short-term feeling right now because maybe I'm in a worse mood than usual, or there could be a million other reasons, but truly my main goal is still to build as much muscle as possible, then don't give in to the temptation to end the surplus, because that would actually hinder your long-term goal. As a segue, the second consideration I would invite you to make is this: how often are you checking your appearance? In a fat loss phase, you may be able to see some fat loss progress every week or 2 weeks or every month. However, in a muscle building phase, you can't really expect to see progress with your physique because muscle grows very, very slowly compared to how quickly we can lose body fat. And as I said at the beginning, you will gain a little bit of body fat, which then gets deposited on top of the muscle that you're also building, thus hiding it. So you will not be able to see a difference in your physique in terms of muscle growth, and you will most likely uncover the majority of your new muscle if you choose to go through a muscle building phase. Now, there are exceptions, of course. For example, if you started at a very, very low level of body fat and at a very, very low level of muscle mass, you might actually be able to see a lot of progress throughout your muscle building phase and decide that you don't even want to remove body fat at the end. But this only really happens to people with a very specific physical structure and who also don't have a lot of experience training in the gym, because that's really the only time that you can expect to gain a lot of muscle in a relatively short period of time. Some of the clients I work with who are already more experienced with resistance training are likely going to see the best overall body composition after going through a surplus, and then also after removing some of the extra body fat with a fat loss phase. But the point here is that you can't expect to see the changes that you wish to see in your pictures during a muscle building phase as you would during a fat loss phase. So it doesn't help to check your body as it would potentially to do so if you do it to a reasonable extent and not all the time during a fat loss phase. So if you are checking your appearance relatively often, I think that doing little to no body checking while you stay in a surplus is going to relieve these feelings of discomfort. What can also help is to change your wardrobe, to have a, in quotes, muscle building wardrobe and a, in quotes, leaner or fat loss wardrobe. Because what feels really uncomfortable is to wear clothes that don't fit you well and that don't make you feel confident, whether they don't fit you because you're so slim that they fall off of you, or whether they don't fit you because they are too tight. In this case, it would likely be the latter because you're in a surplus. So having clothes that fit you comfortably when you are at higher body weights because you are in a caloric surplus, and vice versa, also have clothes that fit you better when you're at lower body weights because you're maybe maintaining a leaner physique or working towards fat loss, is likely also going to help relieve the discomfort that you're feeling. What you also want to do is shift the focus away from your appearance towards something else in the realm of fitness that doesn't have to do with the way that you look. I like to invite my clients to set performance goals, which could be as simple as you really like one exercise, so focus on getting as strong as you can for reps or by increasing your load at that exercise while maintaining proper form. Or it could be more specific, like I want to get a full pull-up, for example. So by doing this, you're shifting the focus away from what you look like to what your body can do. Or it could be another fitness endeavor that's entirely different. That's going to be down to the individual. What's important is that you try to detach yourself from your appearance, because right now your goal isn't to look as good as possible, is to put on muscle. And since that comes at the cost of some extra body fat, you might feel a little bit more uncomfortable. But it's going to pay off dividends in the future. So thank you for the question, and I hope that this helps. Question number 3. What's your experience with using tape when working out? So for those who don't know, I bind my chest using kinesiology tape or KT tape when I go to the gym. Importantly, I have a few disclaimers. First of all, this is just my own personal experience. I'm not making any recommendations to anyone. And this personal experience is based on me as an individual. And what I mean by that is that, first of all, my chest size is already small. So your results may be different if you're even smaller than me or if you're bigger than me. Secondarily, I was blessed with my mother's genes. She is an Italian woman with splendid Mediterranean olive skin, which I inherited from her. Thank you, Mom. So as a result, I've never got spots, acne, or anything of the sort. During my first puberty, I would maybe get a couple of zits around my period when I was still getting a period. At worst, to be honest. During my second puberty, after I began to transition from assigned female at birth to male, I had pretty much the same experience. So, for this reason, if you have greater skin problems, what my experience looks like will not be the same as you, and what I can do safely might not be what you can do safely. So, with that out of the way, my experience is the following. I wear only one strip of KT tape, and I usually keep it on 5 to 6 days out of the week. My tape is water resistant, so it doesn't peel off even though I shower every day. And I've never had any issue when working out. It doesn't peel off, it doesn't cause me pain. Importantly, it doesn't constrain my chest or my ribs. I have no problem breathing. And having talked to various gender affirming surgeons, for example, Mr. Danos, whom I interviewed in episode 35, my understanding is that KT tape doesn't compress the torso and specifically the ribs like a binder, so it's relatively safe for your bones. The main issue might be skin related instead. For example, if you don't peel it off carefully, you could actually strip some of the skin off. So, what I do is I take it off while I'm taking a shower, and I often soften it with baby oil, or I use Vaseline to remove it. So I apply some Vaseline on my fingers and I slip my fingers slowly under the tape so that the Vaseline goes between the tape and my skin. And that helps loosen up the tape and lower its adhesive properties so that slowly, with the help of the Vaseline, it comes off the skin. Other issues that I've heard about are the fact that it can cause rashes or blisters. And again, I have not experienced that personally because I don't have a lot of skin problems. Lastly, I can keep it on, as I said, 5 to 6 days in a row without issues. I could likely keep it on even longer, to be honest, because after 5 to 6 days, it's only just starting to peel off a little. So if I really wanted to, I could keep it on. But I also want my skin, the skin underneath, to breathe, so to speak, to get some air and some respite from it, at least one day out of the week. And having done this for many months now, I personally don't experience any negative effects. As I said, your own experience could be different, but hopefully that helps you out and answers your questions. Question number 4, which is also the last one for today. What's your recommendation for a workout when you don't have a lot of time? So first of all, I really like this question because it implies that you, dear listener, don't want to skip a workout altogether just because you can't follow your program as you normally would. You still want to get a workout in, even though you're in a bind and you can't dedicate to it the usual amount of time, which is fantastic. I would always encourage you to do what's under your control, even if it's not the quote unquote perfect workout that's 1 hour long or however long you consider a perfect workout to be, which, as you can tell, is subjective. So clearly the perfect workout length doesn't exist. Having said that, when a client is short on time, and it happens often, I work with really busy clients, and they're too committed not to skip workouts, then that's what I recommend. Option number 1, if you normally follow a longer program, so a program with longer sessions, that's what I mean, then you could choose to take the initial exercises in your program and only do those. At least the way I program, I tend to put the priority exercises for each session at the very beginning, because that's when you are freshest for your workout. So you can put the most amount of energy into your performance, and therefore you're likely going to get slightly better results from those exercises than from the ones that follow. Not to say that the ones that follow are useless to grow muscle, but in comparison, it makes sense to think that when you have more energy, you're going to get better performance and therefore slightly better results over the long term, which is also why I tend to change the priority exercises and priority muscles when there are multiple sessions throughout a week in which a client targets the same muscle groups. For example, if somebody is keen on developing their upper body, I might have an upper body session that focuses on the chest and an upper body session that focuses on the back, so that over time you get overall a similar muscle building stimulus, assuming that everything else is equal. The other option is, if you don't normally follow a program with sessions that include a longer duration, or if for some reason you're not going to follow it this week and you just want one session that covers all of your bases as well as possible while not taking very long in the gym, then I would recommend a full body session that includes a push-pull upper body superset plus one exercise for the lower body, whether that's the quads, the hamstrings, and or the glutes, if your priority is your upper body. On the other hand, if your priority is to grow your lower body, then I would recommend two exercises for two distinct muscle groups in the lower body, for example, quads and hamstrings. And if we think about these in terms of movement patterns, I would recommend a squat variation, which is generally going to cover your quads and your glutes to a certain extent, and a hip hinge variation, which is going to cover your hamstrings and your glutes. And then an exercise for your upper body pushing musculature, so chest or shoulders, and an exercise for your upper body pulling musculature, which would be your back musculature. So in total, you will be performing only 3 exercises and you would choose your priority muscles. And if you're going to follow this shortened program for multiple weeks, then you would consider changing the priorities from session to session. For example, you could do a lower body focused session where you train only your back muscles when you do your single exercise for the upper body, and then another lower body focused session where instead you train your pushing musculature and maybe you train your chest or your shoulders, and then a final lower body focused session where now you're training the chest or the shoulders, the muscle you didn't train the first time. You could mix and match upper body focused and lower body focused training sessions throughout the week to cover as much of your body as you possibly can. Or you could follow the same pattern with the upper body focused sessions as I suggested with the lower body focused ones, where maybe in the first upper body focused session you train the hamstrings for your lower body exercise. In the second session, you train the quads, and in the third session, you train one of the two, or you place more emphasis on the glutes, depending on what your goals are. In terms of exercise selection, I strongly encourage you to pick the exercises that are going to train the highest number of muscles so that you cover your bases as much as is possible. And these exercises are called compound or multi-joint exercises. If you train more than one joint, you are going to train more than one muscle. And practical examples of these would be squats, deadlifts for the lower body, and bench press or a pull-up or a row for the upper body. Finally, by supersetting the push-pull upper body exercises, you're going to make the session more time efficient. And there's also some research in resistance training showing that supersets, antagonist supersets, where you train opposing muscles with the two exercises in the superset. For example, you would do a row for the back and then go straight into, or you take a very short break and then you go straight into a chest exercise, so a bench press for the pecs, for example. That's what a superset looks like. And then after one set of each, you take a slightly longer break and then you repeat for the second set. This approach seems to show some benefits to muscle growth, specifically for the upper body musculature. You could, however, also potentially superset lower body exercises, but I don't necessarily recommend it because we carry a lot more muscle in the lower body than in the upper body. And if you're training with the right intensity of effort and proper form, doing squats and deadlift variations, I don't think, honestly, that you can actually superset a squat variation and a deadlift variation. It's going to be extremely fatiguing. You're going to feel absolutely destroyed because your whole body is going to be very fatigued. But the individual muscles might not reach the right intensity of effort to produce an effective muscle building stimulus. So it could actually hinder your progress to superset leg exercises. If you're really strapped for time, you want to do a lower body focus session, and you need to do supersets, that would be when I would recommend replacing the second lower body exercise with not a multi-joint lift, but an isolation lift. So if you really must do a superset, I would consider it to be, I would consider, so if you really must do a lower body superset, then you could do a squat variation and superset it with a hamstring curl, which would isolate the hamstrings instead of a deadlift variation. A potentially even better option would be to do a full body superset. And what I mean by that is that instead of supersetting lower body exercises, you would superset your lower body exercise with your single upper body exercise. I would try to make this superset a push-pull full body superset. And for this purpose, I would consider squat variations a type of lower body push, and hip hinge variations a type of lower body pull. So, for example, if you have an upper body pushing movement, like a barbell bench press, then I would superset that with a lower body pulling movement, so a deadlift variation. However, I wouldn't be as stringent about the push-pull nature of this particular full body superset, because some people might not recover very well from this particular pairing, for example, but they might find that they can recover from doing a deadlift into a pull-up superset. So you will need to experiment and find what it is that you can recover from and perform well enough. Again, it's not ideal because lower body exercises are that fatiguing, but if there really is no other choice, I would potentially choose this option or the previous option of supersetting a compound lift with an isolation lift targeting another muscle in the lower body. As a final option for time efficient workouts, if you have the time for maybe an extra exercise and you want to throw in an isolation movement for the lateral delts, the biceps, the triceps, or the abs, or maybe the calves, it really depends on your priority muscles at the time, then what you could do to keep it really, really time efficient would be to use a metabolite or intensity technique for this particular isolation exercise. Metabolite or intensity techniques usually involve really short rest periods and a lot of reps or a lot of sets clustered together in a very short period of time. And normally the purpose of them is to induce metabolic stress, which seems to potentially play a role in muscle growth, which is why these techniques are utilized in the context of building one's physique. But another benefit is that they also are very time efficient. And examples of these techniques are drop sets or myo reps sets or cluster sets or rest pause sets. There are several that you can try and that I would encourage you to Google to learn more about, or simply continue following this podcast because I will dedicate other episodes to discussing these in more depth. So hopefully this helps. Thank you to everyone for contributing these questions. Thank you, dear listeners, for listening and for lending me some of your time as always. If you're interested in coaching, I'm currently still taking on clients, so you're very welcome to check out the links in the show notes so that you can read more about my service and fill out the application form so that we can schedule a complimentary video consultation and we can discuss how I can help you. Thank you again for tuning in, and until next time. Lastly, if you want to support the podcast and help me reach more people, please leave a 5-star rating or review on any podcast platform that you're using. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll speak to you soon.